Welcome back to Archaeology After Dark, everyone. I am, of course, your host, Daniel Rhodes. My guest today is Thomas Delgado. Thomas, thanks for joining me.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here virtually, but it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah, we just got done with a lengthy discussions about how complicated time zones are.
Even just 1 hour, Salt Lake City still has to be a little behind. But hey, it's great to be talking to people in Alabama. I'm from Tennessee, so hearing a Southern accent has been honestly music to my ears.
So, Thomas, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a PhD student at the University of Utah and their Department of Geology and Geophysics. So, not anthropology, but I am an anthropologist. So, I work for a project called Project Find 'em, and we look at the isotopes embodied within human tissues, specifically teeth. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about isotopes and what that can tell us in a little bit. But my background is predominantly in forensic anthropology and bioarchaeology. So, I got my master's at California State University, Chico. And then before that, I was at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville for my bachelor's, and I worked at their Forensic Anthropology Center managing an NIJ grant on the decay process after I finished my BA.
So, tell us what made you migrate from Tennessee all the way to Utah? I know that's quite a leap, not only culturally but geographically.
Yeah, it's quite a trek. I mean, I went to California first, so it was a little bit of a shorter jaunt the second time around. But I ended up stepping not out of the field of anthropology at all, but into a sister discipline to really develop these isotopic concepts and to better myself as like an isotope chemist and how we apply these things within anthropology. Because while there's definitely a lot of great experience that people have integrated isotope research with in anthropology, I always just feel like we can do a little bit more and understand the science a little bit better. So I really wanted to get all in on geochemistry and what the science of isotopes is. Um, and it's been great. I got access to instruments. We get to actually do some really neat research on tissues that I don't think I could have gotten within an anthro department.
So that leads us to Project Find 'em. I'm saying that right.
Hmm.
So tell
Yes,
us,
very simple acronym.
yeah, I love it because so part of what Project Find 'em does is it helps identify missing or displaced people, right?
Yes, adjacent to that. So we work with the Defense POW MIA Counting Agency. Their main base is in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. I don't know why I blanked on that. So we partner with them to help them essentially identify remains. So we're very much isotope chemists. So we are working on developing methods to better refine how we make region of origin estimations or lived history estimations based on isotopes to provide those toolkits to the DPAA to then help identify remains. So we're doing a project that directly helps the DPAA, but I don't want to conflate that we are doing the identifications ourselves. We're just providing tools and developing research.
So how did Project Find 'em get started?
You know, oh my goodness, do I actually know the full origins of this? So this came out of a conversation with the principal investigator, Dr. Gabe Bowen, and his long collaboration with the DPAA's primary isotope chemist, Leslie Chesson. So they have been developing new isotope landscapes to map the United States. And one of the big issues we're running into is not having a human tissue reference when we're doing human tissue comparisons. So Project Findem is essentially developed to remedy that issue by creating an isotope database of human third molars that we can then do isotopic comparisons to after the fact.
So correct me if I'm wrong, and mind you, some of this is being supplemented by uh, crime scene investigations.
Mhm.
So, isotopic analysis, especially on teeth, varies from region to region. Like, say, the
Hmm.
isotopes in my teeth would be different from, say, somebody who lives in like Washington State or Maine.
Hmm. Yes, exactly. So we work with the oxygen isotope system, which is imbued into the body by drinking water. So our local tap waters and precipitation rainwaters are different based on where we live. So if we have a good understanding of that isotopic distribution across space that's actually in our human tissues, that should help increase our ability to say something about the regions that people have lived in. And then while we work with teeth, different tissues can say different things. So teeth are considered long recorders of isotopes, meaning that they pick up isotopic information as the teeth are being developed, which is typically around birth to like 16, 17 years of age. Bone also is a long recorder. It holds on isotopic information for about 10 years at a time. But you can also use hair and nails to look at very short-lived history and travel history as well. So one of the more popular examples that people use is there was a migrant that came into Salt Lake City. This is, I believe, from Brett Tipple's 2011 paper. But there was a Chinese migrant that came into Salt Lake City and they did hair isotope analysis. And as they segmented the hair, you can see the water shift from China to more consistent with Salt Lake City, which really shows that we can capture this interesting time-based information depending on what tissues we analyze.
So when doing this kind of analysis, I assume there is some margin for error. How precise are we talking about?
I guess how precise is like the isotope ratios that we get out of the instrument, or how precise are the classifications we can make?
Uh, I guess the classifications is what I'm really asking.
It's a pretty broad spectrum. So we can't say like town or city level, but we can generally give a large region, or if we have multiple isotopes, we can kind of constrain it to like this thin band across the United States. So it's definitely not a tool for like positive identification by any means, but it provides investigators a way to focus resources on most likely areas that a person was living in. So it's really dependent on the case and the actual individual isotopes as well.
So, how long have you been with Project Find 'em?
This is my first year.
So
So yeah.
I imagine it's been a pretty steep learning curve.
It has been a lot. I'm not a dental anthropologist by any means. So learning all of the dental like histological methods, like looking at the cellular organization of the teeth, which is something that I'm doing for my PhD research, has been very challenging. And then to add on all the actual chemistry behind it. While I worked at Chico's Stable Isotope Prep Lab while I was there for 3 years, running the instruments and working with the raw data has been a challenge. But it's important to do if I'm wanting to do forensic isotope analysis in the future. But it's definitely been a steep learning curve.
Yeah, so I imagine I was going somewhere with that. I lost. Sorry. I'm sorry. So I would imagine that since the learning curve is so steep, if somebody wanted to get into isotopic analysis, especially in a forensic level, they have to start somewhere.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of tiers to how you can approach integrating isotopic research or learning about isotopes. The first one would just be read some papers, understand what isotope systems can tell you. So, for example, oxygen, hydrogen, strontium are really good for the geolocation aspect that we've been talking about to this point. So, where people have lived in space. But there's also isotopes of carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur that you can look at that tells you more about what people eat, diet, weaning practices. That's a very prevalent application of nitrogen isotopes in archaeology and bioarc. So if you start reading about what different isotope systems can tell you, that'll build a foundation for then, okay, well, I know what the isotopes can tell me. How can I actually look at isotopic data? And then as you look through that isotopic data, you learn how things are distributed across time, space, and populations. Then I think that really gets your foot into the door to applying isotopic research. I don't think for anthropology you have to go all the way to the super extreme of I do all the data cleaning, I do all the mass spec analysis, I do all the sample prep. While I think a lot of those are really good tools and are things that I was seeking out, if you wanted to be, I don't want to say a more traditional anthropologist, but if you wanted to just be incorporating an aspect of research into your broader research, you don't have to be an expert by any means. That's what people like me and our project and our postdocs and our PI are for, is to provide that analysis to help guide how we apply isotopes to research.
Yeah, and that's something that I've always really interested in talking to new people on this program is how they apply their research to reality, I guess. So it's no
Hmm.
longer just like words and numbers on a piece of paper, but how it is actually put into practice.
Yeah, and I think that's a great aspect of this that we can say we're doing isotopic research and it has had results. The DPAA, I believe, has had a dozen or so cases that have led to identification because of isotopic analysis. So if we can really refine this method, it is demonstrated to lead to identifications, not just for our recent and long lost war dead, but also for general forensic cases across the country, which not even just across the country, across the world. There's been research done in New Zealand, Europe, Australia that have shown that isotopes do provide enough information that can lead to positive identification. So we get to be grounded in reality, which is sometimes really hard when you're thinking about isotopes. They exist all up here and in our water and in our teeth. But they do say something, and it's been demonstrated and shown, which makes me really happy about how we're refining and developing the method, which is again another big aspect of what Bindem is doing is looking at lab standardization and replication of processes because we want to do good science first and foremost. So how do we incorporate multiple large data from across the world in different labs and different standards to make something usable to better refine the method?
And make sure everybody has like this data and the equipment to use it available to them. So it's not like just one section of the world that is properly identifying people while
Hmm.
the rest of the world falls behind.
Exactly. And, that was a challenge that I encountered when I was developing my thesis research. So, I guess to kind of tangent just a little bit, my thesis research looked at how we classify isotopes spanning from Mexico to Colombia to help with undocumented border process and the identification of those individuals. But there were only like 170 actual tap water and bottled water samples spanning those 9 countries that were readily available. So when you compare that to the United States, where a lot of this research is happening, the United States had over 10,000 samples versus not even 200 for the region that I was trying to work with that has a humanitarian effort going on with it. So it's really important that we develop these larger, more robust sampling regimes. And it makes sense that the United States has the most because this is where we're developing the research. This is where the database I use was hosted. Data is being generated across the world, but a lot of it's happening here. So there's definitely something that has to be said about how we are sampling underserved communities where there are mass fatality incidents happening. And an area that I get interested in with that are those diasporic regions. So the US Mexico border, the southern border of Europe, as migrants seek asylum out of Africa. I think these are real hot spots of mass fatality incidents where isotopes can be very informative. But we have to sample a lot more to really get that information. And we also have to sample more human tissues, which is extremely challenging given a lot of those contexts too.
Yeah. So say you're doing your analysis on like an isolated region in like Mexico or Central America.
Mhm.
How do you take that data and incorporate it to what you already have?
That is the real challenge. And that's where like the lab standardization I really think comes in. And for me, there's a bigger issue of how anthropologists share data that is challenging to rectify. And this was actually a theme of both the forensic sciences meeting in Baltimore this year and also the bioanth meetings also in Baltimore this year. They were both at the same place. It was wild. Is this concept of how we as anthropologists share data that is affiliated with human remains. Is that ethical? If if we anonymize it, de-identify it, then can we share it? How do we go about getting consent? How do we go about hosting this? And I think that's something that we as a field have to continue having conversations about to really, again, address this lack of data in a lot of our research. And that's not limited to isotopes. This can include things like craniometrics. It can include morphological characteristics of the bone, getting to like biological profile analysis. There's so much minutia in data that I don't think we've figured out how to really share it quite yet. Um, I do my best with the isotope data that we've collected. Our isotope data for Findem will be open source and open access because there is a consent IRB process that goes along with it, which is the benefit of utilizing living donors. But for these smaller, isolated regions that are already in conflict, how do we share data to the broader community? I think that's very much a conversation that is still developing for anthropologists.
Yeah, and that's another conversation that I've noticed happen at conferences a lot. That people, especially when you do cross global regions, like what the actual standard of ethics is. Like, say, the standards and
Hmm.
practices here in the United States are different from most European countries, also.
Hmm. Yeah, very much so. There's definitely that kind of cross-cultural, yeah, and that is the very definition of ethics and having a moral code. Ethics is supposed to be dependent on positionality and cultures and your own social structures. So, but how do we inform that into our ethics statements and stances? It will just take a lot of intra and interdisciplinary collaboration that will happen, and I think has been happening. Um, but especially for human remains related data, I think that conversation has to really move forward before we can talk about how we integrate large globalized data sets, also specifically as a topic data sets.
Well, you and I talked about this before we actually started recording the episode, is how the pandemic affected people. And I think that, just the pandemic had been maybe a blessing in disguise. I mean, I know it's horrible to say it like that, but it made us reassess our definition of community, and it's made people a lot
Hmm.
more open to sharing research that they're doing when they normally wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that in my experiences as well. Like COVID was bad. I
Yeah,
don't think there's any
no one,
denying
no one
COVID
here
was
is saying
very
COVID was
bad.
good.
COVID was a terrible experience, but there were a lot of really interesting conversations happening at that time. Like I remember the pandemic is how I really first got involved with like the Academy of Forensic Sciences was virtually through a screen with people I had never met because they were there. There were these more accessible discourse options. I could just log in from my computer. I didn't have to book flights, didn't have to travel, didn't have to spend any of that expense. And I think that fostered a lot of good discourse and community building within the field. And, for me personally, I made some very crucial friends during the pandemic that I needed to build my own community support. Um, Thinking about it was just a lot.
We all have
So no,
trauma.
I think
We all have trauma from the pandemic. It's shared trauma.
we all have trauma from the pandemic, yes. But I think coming out of the good things, I do think it opened up discourse, and I think it opened up to the community to talking to each other a bit more. Um, I will say, from my little bit of a pessimistic view, I think we're kind of on a downslope from that, but I believe that we'll pick it right back up.
Yeah, we just have to wait for the next global crisis, and then everybody will be right back on the same page.
Right back on the same page. Maybe we can sort out our data sharing before that. That would be good.
Yeah, that would be good. Maybe we could use that data to prevent one of those or numerous global catastrophes that
Yeah.
seem to be never ending lately.
It's true. I mean, to echo the views, the sentiments of several of my colleagues, a lot of people think that we should have more of a role in public health. I guess I say we, mainly the forensics people, and informing like death metrics and stuff, which I think could be really interesting and could help contribute to how we manage future mass fatality incidents.
Yeah. So let me ask you this.
Big tangent there.
No, no, no. It was really important. I thought it was really important because this is one of the things that I like discussing on this project is how people's definition of community varies and has changed in the past 5 years. It has been 5 years,
It's been 5 years.
and we all still have the trauma from it.
Yep. Hey, I haven't uninstalled Zoom in 5 years, so
No,
can't
so
ever
it,
escape. That icon
now it's
haunts
part of
me.
like the regular educational system here in the United States is so if there's like an inclement weather day at school, kids don't get a free day anymore. It's virtual day.
I've heard that. I have heard that. I don't have anyone in like close to me in the public school system, but I've definitely heard that now things just get to be virtual. It's like, congrats, school day. You're sick. Sign in via Zoom. Which at a college level, I respect offering it, but I think kids should just have the day off.
Yeah. Honestly, they have enough trauma as it is. Just my opinion.
Yeah.
So Project Find'em, what is there? Since it's a project, I assume it's an open-ended research date. Like you don't have a set date for concluding what Project Find'em is doing.
So we do. We are funded by it's the Henry Jackson Foundation, which is co-owned by not co-owned. They have a tight relationship with the DPAA, so they're our direct funding source. So we're set to wrap up in July of this year. So we are still collecting wisdom teeth as like fully right now. So if anyone would like to donate third molars, here's my shameless plug to donate your third molars to our project. If you have an extraction coming up, you can just Google Project Find Them. It's FIND-EM. I'm sure it'll be in the project description.
Yeah, and I will
The
put the information for Project Find Them in the description of this video so you can find it there also.
Perfect. But yeah, short 5 minute survey. Tell us about your lived history, where you lived, and we'll take your teeth. We'll look at their isotope ratios, and we'll work on developing better isotope maps for the United States, which will almost certainly help lead to better identifications when we develop the toolkits come the summer.
Okay, I'm really giddy about this. I'm using the word giddy because this is fun. This is the first time I've had somebody on this show actually ask for something from your body. That's so cool.
Listen, we kind of need teeth. Teeth are very important tissues. I don't know. I guess here's a little tangent about why teeth are important tissues. So, since we're primarily interested in forensic identifications and those applications even outside of the 50-year forensic context, we're working in you know environments that are going to be prone to contamination. So these are likely going to be peoples whose remains have been previously buried or scattered on soil. Teeth don't really undergo taphonomic changes. So the chemical composition of your teeth won't really vary in response to the environment. So since teeth are hard tissues, they're durable, they're very commonly recovered in a forensic context, and they don't really get that easily contaminated, and they tell you something about where a person was born and living during childhood. These are such good factors to why teeth are being used for this research over, say, bone. With bone, you have to be deceased. We can take teeth from living donors that can consent, being a big thing. They can consent to the research, and they can tell us firsthand their lived history information. That's not to say we are partnering with skeletal collections across the United States as well, to sample portions of those collections on their teeth. But I think having the living donor component is really important to get that firsthand information from the donor. And then yeah, and teeth are very important for all the reasons I said. So please, we would love your teeth.
So let me ask you this. Is it more beneficial to have people between like a certain age range donate their wisdom teeth? The third molar is a wisdom
Mhm.
tooth,
Yeah,
I
it
think.
is.
So I know the
As
wisdom,
long as
yeah, I know the wisdom teeth don't actually show up until like a certain age, but I would
Mhm.
assume, if the older the person is, the more isotopic absorption there's been.
Yeah, so
I totally
again,
know how that
there
works.
no, you're good because that actually gets into another reason why teeth are so cool for isotopes. So third molars specifically, they form between the ages of 7 and 16, the enamel portion. So teeth are made up of, they have an inner portion called dentin, and then the part that you actually brush is the enamel. And we look at the enamel isotopes. So isotopes only become incorporated into enamel during that time of formation, which again, for wisdom teeth is about 7 to 16 years old. So even if you're 90 years old donating your wisdom teeth, that enamel hasn't turned over since you were 16. So no new isotopes no new oxygen isotopes get incorporated into the enamel after that time of formation. So you get this really nice time window into when those isotopes could be incorporated. And depending on what we want to look at with other variables like age, we can even map how isotopes have changed across regions based on a year. Because we live in an ever-changing environment, things will subtly change over time. So you could even map that pattern using the enamel. Say this person at 16 in this region had this isotope signature. This person at 16, 20 years later lived in this same region, and maybe that isotope signature is different.
I think that's so cool that it can be that
It's
precise.
really neat.
It makes me think of like when you're looking at the rings on a tree, the thin, wavier lines indicate years of drought. I'm just like, okay,
Hmm.
it's not the same thing, but it's kind of the same
But
thing.
it's similar. And like an aspect of research that I'm looking at right now is intra-tooth sampling. So within the enamel itself, how are isotopes changing from the portions that form earlier and during the formation process versus portions that form later during the formation process. So if you lived in Austin, Texas at 8 years old, can we extract that 8 year old isotope signature from your teeth and then compare it to, oh, after 8 years old at 10, you moved to Portland, Maine, and that's going to have a very different isotope signature. So, can we pull out both of those movement instances from within the tooth itself? Um, it's promising.
So what's Project Find'em going to do when everything is concluded? I assume everything is
Hmm.
published at some point, but will
Yep.
it also incorporate it in some form or fashion?
Yeah. So, not to get too in the weeds about our actual like deliverables, but we will be hosting an open access third molar isotope database. So you will be able to go in for free to our database and see the isotopic composition, distributions, and portions of lived history for probably 300 to 500 different individuals across the United States. We're hoping to get about that many. And then we'll also create a new isotopic landscape, which again, they're more commonly called isoscapes, but it's just the spatial distribution of isotopes across the contiguous United States. So for the tissues themselves, instead of using a proxy like tap water or rainwater. And then we're also planning on creating a new toolkit to then use those isoscapes. So off of these three different isoscapes that we build off of the tissue, then how do we apply that to an unknown individual to help, provide that region of origin information? So we'll get a database, we'll get new landscape map references, and we'll develop a toolkit to use them as well.
That sounds phenomenal, honestly.
And it'll all be free. And it'll all be free. It'll all be open access. It'll probably require some knowledge of the R programming language, but all the packages and libraries and everything will be available for everyone.
See, that's something I absolutely love. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not against organizations making money, but when you work in like a public school or in an educational program of any kind, things start to get expensive after you do it
Yeah.
so many times. And having something that's open source and free to the public is like a wish come true for a lot of people. Like, I can show this to my students, they can actually learn from it. It's
Yes.
free.
No, I super agree. I'm so passionate about that. And our PI, Dr. Gabe Bowen, also is very passionate about open source materials. I don't think he's ever done a data analysis where the code hasn't been made available. And you can check out some of the projects that we have on GitHub. It's Spatial Lab. I think you can find that through the affiliated links that'll be posted below. It's all over our main website. But we try to do everything we can to provide open access tools. I did that for my thesis too. All the code and analysis I use for my thesis is also publicly available for free. Um, so I can't speak more highly about the need to make things accessible to people. And I love the project for that.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys do amazing work on this program. And I'm so it's funny that I actually found this by accident because it was an ad that came across my Instagram feed.
Oh, our ads are working. Yay.
So
We
your
spend a lot
PR
of money on those ads.
your PR person's doing great.
Good, good. And I also get the ads, which is kind of annoying because I can literally be in a meeting about find them and it will pop up on my phone. Such is life, but at least the ads are working.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you found us. And I was so happy that you reached out and asked us to talk a little bit about the project. While we're in the kind of this winding down, we still are very much accepting new donors. We get a few donations every week. And the more donations we get, the better the end products are going to be. Kind of going back to that need for more sampling, large scale sampling regime of human tissues like this has not really been done globally. So, since we get to kind of start the first one, the more data we get, the better the products get to be.
Yeah. So that is going to wind us down a little bit. So Thomas, if people wanted to get just involved in bioanthropology, forensic anthropology, the sciences in general, what would
Mhm.
you recommend to them?
I would recommend multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. That's really been my big kick. See how other tools that are not directly within your perhaps immediate interest can contribute to your research. So maybe that's isotope chemistry, maybe that's computer science, maybe that's archaeological theory in a forensic setting. All of those layers I think can really help you develop research and get interested and ingrained in science and these broader disciplines as a whole.
Yeah. So don't limit yourself. I mean, if you find
Don't
something,
limit yourself.
yeah, if you find something interesting, feel free to go down that rabbit hole. That's kind of the joys of research
Yeah.
is people actually encourage you to go down the rabbit hole.
They do. And, I can't think of a single place that I've been that didn't work outside of just anthropology as a discipline. When I was at UT, we were working with chemists and soil scientists and engineers. When I was at Chico, I was working with computer scientists, and they do a lot of wildfire stuff. So the local fire departments and fire management experts, like there's so much out there, and if it just sparks your interest a little bit, just chase after it, incorporate it into what you want to do. And yeah, don't limit yourself. I think you said it perfect, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I try. Try. Well, thank you all for joining us on this episode. Thomas, it's been really great having you.
It's been great being here. Thank you all so much. And if you ever need us, check the links below. And you can also send me an email at thomas.delgado@utah.edu.
All right, so that's going to do it on this episode. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Bye.